I'm Alex Reynolds, 32 years old. My own father actually laughed in my face when I asked for a share of the family business, a business I'd dedicated 12 years of my life to building from the ground up. Before I tell you how that single, crushing laugh ended up costing him his entire company and an 8-figure inheritance, please do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's good to know who's out there listening. My story begins, as it did, for over a decade, in a drab fabric walled cubicle on the 5th floor of the Reynolds Logistics Solutions building. That small 5-by-5-foot box was my whole universe. The air inside always carried that familiar scent of slightly burnt coffee, industrial carpet cleaner, and the soft electric hum of overworked computers. It was the defining aroma of my 20s experience from my well-worn office chair. If I leaned all the way back and stretched my neck, I could just glimpse a sliver of the downtown skyline, squeezed between two much taller, more prominent buildings. But mostly, my view was the bulletin board directly in front of me. It wasn't adorned with family photos or vacation postcards. Instead, it was covered with complex network architecture diagrams, intricate shipping lane charts, and algorithms, scrawled in what looked like a foreign language to everyone else. But to me, they were pure art. 2 floors up, on the 7th floor executive level, my younger brother Marcus held court in a gleaming corner office. Its walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a sweeping panorama of the entire city. He even had an imported Italian espresso machine, whose hiss I could sometimes hear when I was unlucky enough to be up there for a meeting. Marcus had been with the company for 6 years, half my time. He possessed a business degree from a prestigious university, and a smile that could sell anything to anyone. I, on the other hand, had a degree in computational mathematics and a knack for making our company's incredibly complex logistics network operate so seamlessly and efficiently that everyone, including my own family, completely overlooked its existence. And in the Reynolds family, if you were quiet, you were essentially invisible. My father, Richard Reynolds, was the CEO, the founder, the central figure around whom our small corporate solar system revolved. He was the quintessential American, self-made man, and he never allowed anyone to forget it. At every company gathering, every interview, he'd recount the tale of how he launched RLS with just one truck and a vision. He was a force of nature, loud, assertive, a man who viewed the world through handshakes, backpats, and deals sealed on the golf course. He saw a younger, improved version of himself in Marcus. In me, I believe he saw a peculiar, intricate tool, a mere utility, something you keep in the basement until you need it to fix the plumbing. The most significant plumbing job of my career was our largest client, Eastwood Industries. Their contract formed the very foundation of our company, representing millions of dollars in annual revenue, and it was due for renewal. Competitors had been circling for 6 intense months. My cubicle wasn't just my office, it became my entire existence. I worked 18-hour days, and weekends simply vanished. My diet consisted of lukewarm takeout, consumed over my keyboard. I was developing our secret weapon, a groundbreaking predictive logistics algorithm that would slash Eastwood's costs by an astonishing 40% and cut their delivery times in half. It was, without a doubt, my magnum opus. As I sat there late one Tuesday night, watching the final lines of code compile flawlessly, a sensation I hadn't permitted myself to feel in years began to well up within me. Hope. This was it. This was the one achievement they couldn't ignore, couldn't attribute to anyone else. This was my undeniable proof of worth. On my personal desktop at home, safely backed up on an old, dusty external hard drive, lay the digital blueprint of this entire project. It was a simple, unassuming folder labeled engine_v1.0_2011. I had developed its core logic a full year before I officially joined RLS. Fueled by instant noodles and ambition in my college dorm room, I had built every other modern framework for RLS atop that personal, private foundation. At the time, I believed I was giving my family my absolute best. I had no idea that old folder would one day be the only thing standing between me and utter devastation. The company spared no expense for the celebration marking the Eastwood contract renewal. It was held in the grand ballroom of a historic downtown hotel, the kind of place with ceilings so high you felt insignificant just standing there. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow onto tables draped in pristine white linen. An open bar was bustling, and a jazz trio played just loud enough to lend an air of sophistication to conversations. Everyone was there, dressed in their finest, laughing, networking, celebrating a triumph they only partially grasped. I stood near the back, nursing a club soda, feeling as though I were wearing someone else's suit, playing a role in a drama, for which I hadn't received the script. My father, predictably, took the stage. The microphone barely contained his booming voice. He was a master of these moments. "I want to thank every single one of you for your hard work and dedication," he began, beaming. "It's the spirit of this team, the RLS family, that makes us the best in the business." He went through the customary acknowledgments, praising the sales team for their persistence, the finance department for their diligence. Then came the moment I knew was coming, yet it still struck me like a physical blow. "But I want to give a special thank you to my son, our phenomenal vice president of sales, Marcus Reynolds." The applause was deafening. Marcus, looking like a movie star in a perfectly tailored suit, jogged onto the stage and embraced our father. Marcus, my father, declared, slinging a proud arm over his shoulders, lived and breathed this deal. He spent countless hours on the phone, on the golf course, at dinners, ensuring our friend Victor Eastwood knew he was in the best possible hands. His personal touch, his innate charisma, ladies and gentlemen, is what brings a deal of this magnitude across the finish line. That is the future of this company. I just stood there, next to a table of rapidly cooling mini quiches, feeling my stomach clench into a tight knot. My father continued extolling Marcus's business school insights and his natural leadership qualities. Then, as if suddenly recalling a forgotten chore, he squinted out at the crowd. "And of course, a big thanks to the back office tech guys, like my other son, Alex, for keeping all the computers humming along. Great job, fellas." He gave a vague, dismissive wave in my general direction and immediately turned back to Marcus, raising his glass in a toast. A few people nearby shot me quick, uncomfortable glances, a look I knew well, part pity, part thank goodness that isn't me. I picked up a lukewarm shrimp puff and pretended to be engrossed in its construction. 12 years, 6 months of 18-hour days, and I was just the back office tech guys. I wasn't merely unacknowledged, I was utterly anonymous. "You can't let him do this to you again." The voice was quiet but sharp. I turned to see Sophia Chen standing beside me. Sophia was a senior project manager, a rare individual at RLS who was both fiercely intelligent and genuinely compassionate. She actually understood the complexities of my work, and over the years she had become my only true confidant at the company. "It's just how he is," I mumbled softly, the familiar excuse tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's not worth the fight." "The hell it isn't," she retorted, her dark eyes flashing with an anger I couldn't seem to summon for myself. "This isn't the first time, Alex. Remember Project Odyssey 3 years ago? The complete overhaul of the West Coast distribution network. You worked yourself sick on that. Who got the promotion and the bonus? Marcus. Remember the Henderson merger, when you integrated their disastrous database with ours over Christmas break? Who got the write-up in the industry journal? Marcus. J took a breath. "You handed them this Eastwood contract on a silver platter. You saved this company's biggest account. He knows it. I know it. And you are letting him treat you like the kid who fixes the office Wi-Fi." Every word was a direct hit. She was right. The pattern was so old, so deeply ingrained. I had stopped viewing it as a series of individual injustices and had simply accepted it as the environment I lived in. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, the question sounding weak even to my own ears. "You're supposed to stop acting like an employee who's grateful for a paycheck," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "and start acting like you own the place. Because morally you already do. You've earned a piece of it. Alex, you just have to be brave enough to claim it." Sophia's words were a catalyst. They ignited a slow-burning fire within me that I couldn't extinguish. For the next week, I was consumed. I delved into the company archives, retrieving 12 years of project files, quarterly reports, and performance reviews. I entered a fugue state, surrounded by binders and spreadsheets in my small apartment. I was meticulously constructing a case, piece by painstaking piece. I assembled a 60-page portfolio, a detailed testament to my career at RLS. I didn't just list my projects, I quantified them. The algorithms that boosted fuel efficiency by 12%, the inventory system that reduced warehousing costs by 22%, the routing software that had generated an estimated $30 million in new business. The numbers were stark, precise, and undeniable. I had been the silent, uncredited engine of RLS's growth for over a decade. Then, fueled by a blend of anger and morbid curiosity, I did something I had always been afraid to do. I visited Glassdoor and several other salary comparison websites. I entered my official title, Supply Chain Algorithm Specialist, along with my years of experience and specialized skills. The number that flashed on the screen felt like a punch to the gut. I wasn't just being underpaid. I was being massively exploited. My salary, the one my father so generously provided, was more than 20% below the industry's average starting rate for a recent graduate. A kid fresh out of college was worth more on the open market than I was after 12 years of generating millions for my own family. That night, my mother Diana called. Her timing, as always, was perfect. She was the family's designated peacemaker, the professional smoother of waters. Her primary role was to ensure the calm surface of the Reynolds family life was never disturbed by unpleasant things like confrontation or raw emotion. "Hi, sweetie," she chirped, her voice a warm, familiar melody. "I was just thinking about you. We were all so proud at the party. That Eastwood deal was just a triumph for your father and Marcus." "Hi, Mum," I said, the words feeling stiff in my mouth. "I'm glad it worked out. You know, your father works so hard. He carries the weight of the whole company on his shoulders," she continued, laying the groundwork. "I know he does," I said. "I was the one who built the algorithm that secured the contract." "Mum," a slight, almost imperceptible pause. "Of course you did, honey. We all know you're a genius with all that technical stuff. It's wonderful, but you know how it is. Marcus is the face, and your father needs a strong face for the company." I decided to push forward. "I'm thinking of talking to Dad formally about my role at the company. My compensation, my future, maybe even a small equity stake, a real promotion to a leadership position." The silence on the other end of the line was no longer slight. It was a chasm. When she finally spoke, all warmth had been surgically removed from her voice. It was replaced by a tight, anxious strain. "Alexander, I forbid you to do that. Please do not make things complicated." "Complicated, Mum. Asking to be paid fairly for my work is complicated. You don't understand," she said, her voice dropping. "He's under so much pressure, and you don't remember what it was like before RLS. He had another business years ago. It failed. We almost lost everything. Alex, the house, the savings, everything. You were too young to remember the stress, the fighting, the fear. Your father built this company to give us security. He can't handle instability. He sees confrontation as a threat. Please, for my sake, don't rock the boat. Just keep doing your good work. Be happy you have a safe, secure job." I gripped the phone, my knuckles turning white. It clicked into place. This wasn't just about preserving peace. It was about her own trauma. She was asking me to sacrifice my future on the altar of her comforts, to remain small and silent so she wouldn't have to relive her own fears. My ambition wasn't just complicated. It was a direct threat to the fragile peace she had constructed. "I have to go, Mum," I said, my voice flat. I hung up before she could reply. I felt a profound, chilling sense of isolation. I wasn't just battling my father's arrogance or my brother's entitlement. I was battling my mother's deep-seated fear. I was utterly and completely alone in this. I looked at the 60-page document on my desk. It was no longer just a portfolio. It was an indictment. Sophia was right. It was time to stop acting like an employee. It was time to discover my true worth. And I had a feeling the answer wouldn't be found inside the RLS building. I picked up my phone, my hand surprisingly steady, and called my father's secretary. "Hi, Carol. I need to schedule a meeting with my father, please, as soon as possible." The next afternoon, I found myself standing outside the imposing double doors of my father's office. The thick, polished mahogany seemed designed to intimidate. The portfolio in my hands felt less like a document and more like a shield. I had spent the morning rehearsing my talking points, trying to anticipate his objections, but my heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Carol, his executive assistant, who had known me since I was a teenager dropping by after school, offered a small, nervous smile. "He's ready for you, Alex. Go on in." I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was the pinnacle of corporate powered. A vast mahogany desk, so polished you could see your reflection in it, served as a barrier between my father and the rest of the world. A wall of windows behind him showcased a spectacular view of the city, a view I had helped pay for but was never allowed to enjoy. He sat in a high-backed black leather chair, looking every bit the king in his domain. And he wasn't alone. Slouched in one of the two plush visitor chairs was Marcus. He was casually scrolling through something on his phone, the picture of bored arrogance. He glanced up as I entered, a lazy smirk spreading across his face. Well, look what the cat dragged in." Come to get your gold star for perfect attendance. Bro, Marcus was just walking me through his sales projections for the next quarter, my father said, his voice a low rumble. He gestured to the empty chair beside Marcus without making eye contact. Inspirational stuff. Now, what's so important that it couldn't be an email? Son, my carefully prepared script, my logical arguments, all dissolved in the acidic presence of my brother. This wasn't a private father-son meeting, it was a public execution. My request was being prejudged, turned into a spectacle for my brother's amusement. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to remain even. I walked forward and placed the heavy portfolio squarely in the center of his desk. Dad, I requested this meeting to discuss my future with Reynolds Logistics. My father gave the portfolio a cursory glance, his expression one of profound disinterest. All right, I'm listening. Talk. I've been with RLS for 12 years. I started, my voice gaining a little strength, and in this document, I have meticulously outlined my contributions during that time, the proprietary systems I've built from scratch, the quantifiable revenue I've directly generated, and the millions of dollars in savings I've created through efficiency improvements. Specifically, with the new Eastwood algorithm, I have fundamentally revolutionized our core service offering. Marcus let out a theatrical sigh. Oh, here we go. The "I'm a genius" speech. I refused to look at him. I kept my gaze locked on my father. Based on these contributions, and based on extensive market research, I believe my role and compensation should be adjusted. I'm not just a back-office programmer. I'm asking for a promotion to a newly created position of Chief Technology Officer. I'm asking for a salary that reflects my market value. And I'm asking for a 15% equity share in the family business. It's time I had a real stake, a real piece of my inheritance. The word inheritance hung in the air, charged and dangerous. The office fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of city traffic far below. My father leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing as he stared at me. He picked up a heavy, gold-plated pen and began to tap it rhythmically on the polished surface of his desk. Tap, tap, tap. The sound drilled into my skull. Then a low sound started deep in his chest. It was a guttural chuckle. The chuckle grew, swelling in volume until it erupted into a full-throated, booming, contemptuous laugh. It was a horrible, ugly sound, echoing off the glass walls, filling every corner of the room with ridicule. Marcus, seeing his cue, joined in. He threw his head back and howled, his laughter high-pitched and cruel. 15%. Dad, I told you he was getting ideas above his station. CTO, Chief Twerp Officer, maybe. My face was on fire. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I couldn't look at them. I focused on a small knot in the wood grain of the desk, tracing its lines with my eyes, anything to keep from either screaming or shattering. 15%. My father finally said, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye, for pushing buttons on a computer. Alex, for God's sake, you're a brilliant mechanic. I'll give you that. The best. But you don't give the mechanic a 15% stake in the car dealership. He just fixes the damn cars when they break. My own voice came out tight and strained. I don't just fix the cars. I design the engines. The engines that you and Marcus are winning all your races with. That's a cute line, Richard said, the humor vanishing from his face as quickly as it had appeared. It was replaced by a cold, hard authority. But it's a stupid one. Let me give you a lesson in real-world business, because you clearly spend too much time with your machines. Lesson 1. Everyone is replaceable. Every single person in this building, from the janitor to the VP of sales, is replaceable. That includes you. If you think you're worth more, by all means, go try your luck elsewhere. But let me warn you, out there, you're just another resume in a pile. In here, you're family, and you get the family discount. You should be grateful. He waved a dismissive hand at the portfolio. Leave that here. I'll have HR take a look at your salary. Maybe we can bump it up a little for your trouble, a cost of living adjustment. Now, if you'll excuse us, Marcus and I were in the middle of discussing his new promotion and the quarterly bonus that comes with it. The words promotion and bonus were deliberate twists of the knife, designed to make me bleed. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. I didn't reach for the portfolio. I left it sitting there on his desk, a 60-page monument to my own foolishness. I turned without another word and walked out of the office, the sound of their renewed laughter echoing behind me like a death knell. I didn't go back to my cubicle. I went straight to the elevator, my vision blurry. I rode it down to the main lobby, walked past the smiling receptionist, and pushed through the heavy glass doors into the cold afternoon air. The city noise felt distant, muffled, Something fundamental inside me had shattered. It was the bedrock of 12 years of misplaced loyalty, of the naive belief that if I just worked harder, if I was just more brilliant, they would eventually have to acknowledge my worth. Oh, they saw it. They saw it, quantified it, and decided it was worth a joke. I sat in my car in the cavernous parking garage for what felt like hours, just staring at the stained concrete wall in front of me. When I finally summoned the strength to drive home, an email notification was waiting on my computer screen. It was the RLS monthly employee newsletter. I clicked it open, and there it was, a huge, glossy photo of my father and Marcus standing side by side, arms slung around each other's shoulders, beaming with pride. The headline in bold, aggressive font read, "The Reynolds Revolution, Richard and Marcus Reynolds usher in a new era of supply chain innovation." It was about my algorithm, my work, my 6 months of sleepless nights, my revolution. They hadn't just rejected me in private. They had publicly erased me and shamelessly slapped their names onto my life's work. That was the moment the grief inside me turned to ice. The hurt curdled into a cold, hard diamond-sharp clarity. My father had dared me to try my luck elsewhere, and I was going to do exactly that, but not before I reclaimed everything that was mine. I walked over to my bookshelf and pulled down the small, worn leather notebook. Inside were the pages of my true history, diagrams, dates, and handwritten notes, documenting the genesis of my personal projects. And there, on the first few pages, dated March 2011, was the blueprint for my core engine, the intellectual property I had created on my own time, on my own laptop, long before I was their employee. A memory from that afternoon surfaced as I had been making my walk of shame from my father's office. I'd passed Marcus in the hallway. He had looked away, a flicker of something guilt conflict in his eyes. Dad was a little rough in there, he'd mumbled, stuffing his hands in his pockets. I had just stared at him, saying nothing. He had shifted his weight, unable to meet my gaze. That algorithm, it really is that good, isn't it? The question hung in the air. It wasn't an apology, it was a confession. He knew its power, its value, and he had sat there and laughed. In my face anyway. That, more than anything my father had said, sealed their fate. I opened my laptop. I didn't go to a job search website. I went to LinkedIn and typed a name into the search bar, Harrison Weber. The game had changed. Harrison Weber wasn't just a name on a screen to me. He was a figure of near-mythic proportions in the logistics industry. As the COO of Summit Shipping, our largest and most feared competitor, he was known for being a brilliant strategist and a ruthless innovator. He was everything my father pretended to be. Over the years, after I'd spoken on a couple of obscure tech conference panels that our LS had compelled me to attend, Harrison had reached out. His messages on LinkedIn were always brief, professional, and to the point. Impressive insights on predictive analytics. "Mr. Reynolds, if you ever decide you want a bigger playground to play in, my door is always open." I had always politely deflected, citing my loyalty to the family business, a loyalty that now felt like a cruel joke. That night, there was no deflection. I crafted a simple 6-word message. "Mr. Weber, the playground is too small." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. My phone buzzed with a reply in less than 10 minutes, a new message on LinkedIn. It just said, "I've been waiting for this message for 3 years. Call me." He included his personal cell number. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed. He answered on the first ring. "Alex." His voice was crisp, energetic, with no preamble. "Harrison Weber, I was hoping I'd hear from you one day. I suspect this isn't a social call. Are you free for dinner tonight?" 2 hours later, I was sitting across from him in a quiet, discreet steakhouse downtown. This was his world, not mine. He wasn't like my father, a shark who needed to flaunt his teeth. He was more like a crocodile, perfectly still, observing, absorbing everything. He allowed me to speak, and he simply listened. "So," he said finally, after I had given him the sanitized, professional version of my departure, "let me cut through the corporate speak. My sources tell me RLS just renewed the Eastwood contract. My sources also tell me you developed a new system that blew their old metrics out of the water. And I'm guessing from this dinner that Richard and Marcus took a very public victory lap, and you got a nice pat on the head and a job well done email." I was so taken aback by his directness, I could only nod. "I make it my business to know my competition, Alex," he said, leaning forward slightly. "I track shipping data, efficiency ratings, client feedback. For the last 12 years I've seen a pattern at RLS. Every few years there's a sudden quantum leap in their technical capabilities, a leap that doesn't match their R&D spending. I started correlating those leaps with your public activity. You'd speak at a conference about a theoretical concept. Then you'd go dark on LinkedIn for 6 months, and suddenly RLS would roll out a new system based on that exact concept. It wasn't hard to connect the dots. The only thing I could never figure out was why a mind like yours was content to be their ghost in the machine. To be seen, truly seen, by a stranger after being invisible to my own family for so long, was a powerful, disorienting feeling. The rest of the dinner wasn't an interview, it was a prelude to a partnership. I laid out my vision, not just what I had accomplished, but what I was capable of. But I knew talk was cheap. I opened my briefcase. Before we go any further, I said, my voice firm, we need to discuss intellectual property. I laid it all out. The notebook from 2011, the time-stamped files on my personal hard drive for engine_core_v 1.0, created a full year before my RLS employment contract was even drafted. I explained methodically how I had integrated this personal, pre-existing IP into the broader systems I built for RLS. Harrison's calm demeanor shifted. He leaned forward, his eyes sharp and intelligent, fixed on the documentation. He was no longer just a potential employer. He was a strategist seeing a fatal flaw in his enemy's defenses. Their legal team never did a proper IP acquisition. They never executed a contract for your pre-existing work. They just let you build their entire multi-million-dollar infrastructure on top of a core asset that you personally still own. He shook his head slowly, a faint smile spreading across his face. That's not an oversight, Alex. That's a catastrophic, company-killing legal failure. The dinner was just the first step. The next week was a whirlwind. I met with Summit's lead engineers. It was a grueling 8-hour technical review. They weren't just testing my knowledge. They were testing my thinking, my process. For the first time, I was in a room with people who spoke my language, who challenged and respected my ideas. It was exhilarating. Then came the meeting with Summit's chief counsel, a sharp no-nonsense woman named Ace Albright. She and her team spent a full day examining my documentation. They were meticulous, cross-referencing dates, employment contracts, and IP law. Finally, she looked at me across the conference table and gave a single, decisive nod. Your claim is ironclad, Mr. Reynolds. They don't have a leg to stand on. The final meeting was with Harrison and Summit's CEO. They made me the offer. It was more than a job. It was a coronation. Vice President of Innovation, a salary that was triple my RLSPE stock options that would make me a wealthy man, and most importantly, a formal multi-million-dollar contract for the exclusive acquisition of engine_v 1.0. We're not just offering you a bigger playground, Alex, Harrison said, sliding the thick contract across the table. We're giving you the keys to design and build a whole new amusement park. But the offer is contingent on this IP claim being as solid as our lawyers believe. We are investing in your mind, Alex, not in a protracted lawsuit with your father. I looked down at the contract. It was validation. In ink and paper, it was respect. It was everything. I picked up the heavy, expensive pen. You have a deal. My resignation was a quiet 2-sentence email. The reaction was anything but. My father called my cell phone 9 times in a row. I let it go to voicemail. He finally left a message, his voice a frantic, unrecognizable blend of panic and rage. He offered to match Summit's offer. He offered to double it. He offered me the CTO title. He offered me Marcus's corner office. I replied with a simple text, it's too late. The final 2 weeks at RLS were like walking through a funeral. My colleagues avoided my eyes. The air was thick with whispers. Marcus cornered me by the elevators, his face flushed with a sense of betrayal he had no right to feel. After everything this family has done for you, after everything Dad gave you, this is how you repay him, by running to the enemy. He gave me a cubicle and a below-market salary, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the marble floor. I'd say we're even. Excuse me, Marcus, I have work to do. My exit interview was with Vance Mitchell, my father's longtime lawyer and crony. He was all fake smiles and veiled threats. He slid a thick non-compete agreement across the table as if it were a mere formality. I slid it right back. That wasn't part of my original employment contract 12 years ago, I said calmly. So, I won't be signing it now. Vance's practiced smile faltered. It's a standard procedure, Alex. Then you should have made it standard procedure in 2012, I replied. Also, for the record, I want it noted in my exit file that I am retaining full and exclusive ownership of all my personal intellectual property. specifically any and all codebases and systems I developed prior to my RLS employment start date, which were subsequently integrated into RLS systems at my discretion. Vance froze, his pen hovering over a notepad. He stared at me, the blood draining from his face as the terrifying implications of my statement began to dawn on him. What personal property are you referring to? The core engine that runs the entire Eastwood algorithm. For starters, I said, allowing myself a small, cold smile. I stood up from the table. I'm sure a man of your talents can figure out the rest. Have a nice day, Vance. I walked out of that room and out of that building without looking back. Of course, my father wasn't going to let it go. 3 months later, after I had successfully integrated a new, far superior version of my engine into Summit's network, and we had officially secured the Eastwood Industries contract, the lawsuit arrived. RLS sued me and Summit Shipping for intellectual property theft, seeking hundreds of millions in damages. The battleground was a mandatory mediation session held in a soulless high-rise conference room. The air was thick with a hatred so palpable you could taste it. On one side of the impossibly long, polished table sat me, Harrison, and our lead counsel, Ms. Albright. On the other side, my father, looking like a thundercloud, Marcus, looking pale and nervous, and their lawyer, Vance Mitchell. Vance began, his voice smooth and confident. He laid out their case piece by piece, presenting project timelines, internal emails I'd written, server logs showing my activity. He painted a masterful picture of a greedy, disgruntled employee who had methodically stolen company secrets and sold them to the highest bidder. My father sat there, nodding grimly, playing the part of the wronged patriarch to perfection. When he finished, Ms. Albright didn't rebut. She simply opened her laptop and set up a video call. The face of Eleanor Wright, the former CFO of RLS, filled the large screen on the wall. She had resigned a week after I did, after 30 years with the company. Ms. Wright, Albright asked, during your time as CFO, were you ever concerned about the company's handling of Alex Reynolds's intellectual contributions? Constantly, Eleanor said, her voice clear and unwavering. I warned Richard on at least 3 separate occasions, 2 of them in writing, that Alex's compensation was dangerously inadequate for his value. I specifically advised him in 2018 that we needed to execute a formal contract to acquire the rights to Alex's core innovations, which he had informed me were based on pre-existing personal work. Richard told me, and I remember his exact words, "He's my son. I don't need a piece of paper. He works for me." The color drained from my father's face. Marcus sank so low in his chair he almost disappeared. Vance Mitchell began shuffling his papers, his confidence evaporating. Then Ms. Albright played our final card. She didn't raise her voice. She calmly laid out our evidence on the table. One document at a time, my dated college notebook from 2011, the timestamped digital files from my personal hard drive, verified by a third-party forensic expert, the signed affidavit from that same expert stating that engine_core_v 1.0 was not an incidental component but the foundational architecture of RLS's entire modern logistics platform. Reynolds Logistics has been running its most valuable, profit-generating operations on borrowed technology, Ms. Albright said, her voice cutting through the silence, technology that belongs and has always belonged to my client. We are not here today to discuss theft. We are here to discuss the terms of a retroactive licensing fee. She slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was an invoice for a retroactive multi-year, multi-million-dollar licensing fee for the use of my engine. It was a number so large it would have financially crippled the company. Attached was a simple choice: pay the invoice, or sign a legally binding agreement to cease and desist all use of my IP, effectively removing it from their systems within 48 hours. This was it, the moment of truth. My father had a choice: swallow his pride, accept the deal, and save his company, or let his ego burn everything he had ever built to the ground. I watched his face. I saw the stages of grief and fury play out in seconds, the disbelief, the anger, the humiliation. He looked at me, his son, and his eyes were filled with pure, black hatred. He saw a traitor, not a man he had wronged. He shot to his feet, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He slammed his fists down on the table, the impact making the water glasses jump. "No," he roared, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it seemed to shake the room. "Never. This is my company. I built it. Everything in it is mine. We don't need his damn code. We'll build our own." He jabbed a finger at me. "This is over. We'll see you in court. We'll ruin you. He kicked his chair back and stormed out of the room, Vance and Marcus scrambling to follow in his wake like pilot fish trailing a dying shark. The room was silent. Harrison turned to me. Ms. Albright closed her laptop. I just sat there, feeling a strange, hollow calm wash over me, while Harrison said quietly, breaking the silence, he just signed his company's death certificate, and I knew with absolute certainty that he was right. My father had been given a choice between his pride and his legacy, and his pride had won by a landslide. The 48-hour deadline passed in silence. True to my father's bellowed promise, RLs didn't pay the invoice. Instead, their engineers began the impossible task of trying to surgically remove my core engine from their live operational network. It was, as one of my contacts still inside the company later described it, like trying to perform a spine transplant on a conscious patient with a butter knife. The entire RLS system began to hemorrhage. Deliveries were lost. Trucks were missed. Warehouse inventories became a chaotic mess of phantom data and real-world shortfalls. It was a complete and utter system failure playing out in real time. Their biggest clients, already spooked by the Eastwood defection, started to panic. The news hit the industry wire services, and the effect on RLS stock was immediate and brutal. It didn't just dip, it plummeted. Then came the email that every RLS employee had been dreading, an all-hands memo announcing immediate company-wide layoffs. 200 people, 200 families, their careers sacrificed on the altar of my father's ego. The news hit me like a physical weight. These were people I'd worked with for years, people with kids in college, with mortgages, with sick parents, people who had always been decent to me. The triumphant satisfaction of my victory in the mediation room curdled into a sick, hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach. Sophia called me, her voice thick with tears. She'd been let go, along with her entire department. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept seeing their faces. The next morning I walked into Harrison's office before he'd even had his first cup of coffee. "We have to do something," I said, my voice more ragged than I intended. "These are good people, Harrison. They are the victims in this, not the villains." Harrison leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He was a pragmatist, and his expression was cautious. "Alex, I understand how you feel, truly, but Summit Shipping is a business, not a relief agency. We can't absorb 200 employees from our failing competitor out of the goodness of our hearts. The board would never approve it." "I'm not asking for charity," I shot back, my mind racing. "I'm asking you to see a strategic opportunity. These aren't just random unemployed workers. These are the people who hold the institutional knowledge of our biggest former competitor. They have personal relationships with clients we're trying to win. They know the weaknesses of the systems we're competing against because they lived with them. They are a strategic asset. Harrison, an army of talent we can acquire for nothing more than the cost of a salary and benefits. Let me create a targeted recruitment initiative, a pilot program. We'll call it Operation Rebound. We'll skim the cream of the crop, the best engineers, the most beloved account managers, the sharpest logistics coordinators. It's not a handout. It's a corporate raid disguised as a rescue mission." He was silent for a long moment, considering it. I could see the wheels turning in his strategic mind. He was weighing the cost against the massive potential gain. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "A pilot program," he said, "limited scope. You identify 20 key people, we make them offers. If it proves as effective as you claim, we can discuss expansion. But it has to show a clear return on investment, Alex. No exceptions." It wasn't the massive lifeboat I had hoped for, but it was a start. It was something. A few days later, I was walking through the parking garage after a long day when a woman stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. I recognized her instantly, though she looked older and more careworn than I remembered. It was Marlene Davis. She had been the head of customer service at RLS for as long as I could remember, a fixture of kindness and competence. She was one of the 200. She didn't look angry, she just looked exhausted, defeated. "I'm not here to yell at you, Alex," she said, her voice raspy with emotion. "I know this wasn't really your fault. It was Richard's pride, but I just... I wanted you to see a face, a real face, not just a number in a press release." She told me about her 25 years at RLS. She told me about her husband's recent MS diagnosis and the mounting medical bills. She told me about her daughter starting her freshman year of college in the fall and the tuition fund she was no longer sure she could cover. "I'm 56 years old," she said, her voice cracking, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I gave my entire professional life to that company. I don't know algorithms and code, Alex. I just know how to take care of customers. Who is going to hire me now? Her question hung in the air, a devastating indictment of the collateral damage of my war. I couldn't promise her a job in Operation Rebound. The pilot program was focused on engineers and sales staff first. My victory felt utterly hollow, but I could do something. I pulled out my phone. Marlene, I said, my voice softer now. I can't promise you a job at Summit today, but I know a woman. Her name is Catherine. She's one of the top executive recruiters in the retail logistics industry, a real shark, and she owes me a favor. I made the call right there in the dim light of the parking garage. I put her on speakerphone. I told Catherine that if she was looking for the most experienced, dedicated, and beloved customer service director in the entire country, I had found her. I didn't exaggerate. I just told the truth about Marlene's legend within RLS. When I hung up, Marlene was crying, but this time, the tears looked different. Thank you, Alex, she whispered. As I walked to my car, I knew my work was far from over. Winning the battle against my father was the easy part. The hard part was figuring out how to build something better and more humane from the wreckage. A year can feel like a lifetime. In the 12 months that followed the collapse of RLS, my world was rebuilt from the ground up. My father's company was gone. The iconic red and blue trucks were sold off at auction to pay creditors. The glass and steel headquarters building was gutted and transformed into luxury condos. The Reynolds Logistics Solutions name, once a titan in the industry, was now a cautionary tale told in business schools, a ghost. My life at Summit, however, was thriving. Operation Rebound had been more successful than even I had dared to hope. The initial 20 hires had integrated seamlessly, bringing with them a wealth of experience and client relationships that resulted in a quantifiable surge in our market share. Harrison, true to his word, had approved the expansion. Over the next year, we strategically hired over 100 of the best former RLS employees. Sophia was now my director of project management, my indispensable right hand. We hired a dozen of RLS's top engineers who were now helping me build systems that made my old work look primitive. We didn't just rescue people, we absorbed the soul of our former competitor, and it made us stronger than ever. Marlene Davis, after a stellar interview, had landed a senior director position at a major national retailer. She sent me a thank you card at Christmas. My family, however, remained a wasteland. I hadn't laid eyes on my father, and my mother would leave me short, hesitant voicemails every few weeks. Just calling to see how you are, sweetie, which I never had the strength to return. The silence between us was a chasm of unspoken accusations and grief. Then one Tuesday afternoon, my assistant buzzed my intercom. Alex, your brother Marcus is in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment. Should I send him away? I hesitated for a long second. No, I said, surprised at my own answer. Send him up. The Marcus who walked into my office was a stranger. The tailored suit and arrogant smirk were gone, replaced by a slightly frayed button-down shirt and a look of deep-seated exhaustion. He was working, I'd heard through the grapevine, for a small, struggling logistics firm on the other side of town, an entry-level position. He had gone from the corner office to a cubicle. My old life was now his. We sat in silence for a moment, the hum of my new state-of-the-art office filling the void. My office, I realized with a sudden jolt of irony, was nearly twice the size of my father's old one. I came here to apologize, he finally stammered, staring at the expensive rug. He shook his head. No, that's not right. Sorry doesn't even begin to cover it. He finally looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw something other than arrogance or mockery in his eyes. I saw a profound, painful clarity. I was jealous, Alex, he said, his voice quiet and raw. My whole life, Dad held me up as the charismatic one, the people person, the future leader. He praised me for it. But I always knew, deep down, I knew, you had the real gift. You could create things out of thin air, things that worked, things that had immense value. I could never do that. I could shake a hand. I could tell a joke, but I couldn't build anything real. And instead of admiring you for it, I hated you for it. It was easier to belittle you, to make you small, than to admit that I was the one who was a fraud. He took a shaky breath. I sat in that meeting and I laughed. I laughed because your ambition terrified me. Because if you got what you deserved, everyone would finally see that I didn't. You didn't destroy the company, Alex. Dad's pride did, and my cowardice stood by and let it happen. I am truly, truly sorry. The words didn't magically heal 12 years of wounds. They didn't erase the humiliation, but they were real. They were the truth. and it was a start. "Thank you for telling me that," Marcus I said, and to my own surprise, I meant it. His visit seemed to break the dam. A few weeks later, my mother called, but this time she didn't leave a voicemail. I answered. She invited Marcus and me to dinner at her house, the old family home. It was the first time the three of us had been in the same room in over a year. My father, she said, wouldn't be there. He was not feeling up to it. The dinner was an exercise in tension. We moved silverware around our plates. The clinking sounds are naturally loud in the quiet dining room. We talked about the weather. We talked about Marcus's new job. We talked about a movie my mother had seen. We talked about everything and nothing. The elephant in the room was so large it barely left space for the three of us at the table. As I was getting ready to leave, standing in the familiar foyer, my mother stopped me. Her hand on my arm was light, hesitant. "Your father, he's not doing well, Alex," she said, her eyes pleading with me to understand. "He just sits in his study all day staring out the window. He lost more than his company. He lost his identity." "I know, Mom," I said softly. "I was so afraid," she whispered, her carefully constructed composure finally crumbling, tears welling in her eyes. "All those years, I was just so afraid of going back to how things were before, when we had nothing. I thought if I just kept everyone happy, kept everything calm, I could keep us safe. I never meant to hurt you. I was just trying to hold on to the life your father built. I was wrong." I couldn't tell her it was okay. I couldn't offer a forgiveness I didn't yet feel. But looking at my mother, no longer the formidable peacemaker, but a small, fragile woman haunted by her own past, I saw her not as a villain, but as another victim of the dysfunctional system we had all been trapped in. I just nodded and gave her hand a light squeeze. It wasn't a resolution. It was perhaps the beginning of a truce. The war was over. The long, complicated work of surveying the emotional wreckage and figuring out what, if anything, could be salvaged had just begun. 2 years after I walked out of Reynolds Logistics Solutions for the last time, a small, square package arrived at my office. There was no return address, but I recognized the shaky, distinctive handwriting on the label immediately. It was from my father. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside there was no long letter of apology, no explanation. There was only a framed newspaper clipping. It was the full-page article from the Wall Street Journal, the one that had meticulously dissected the spectacular rise and fall of his company. It was a brutal, clinical autopsy of his life's work. Taped to the corner of the glass was a small yellow sticky note, the kind he used to leave on my desk when I was a kid. On it were 6 words written in his familiar bold script: "You were never replaceable." I hung it on the wall of my office, not as a trophy to gloat over, but as a stark daily reminder of the devastating cost of pride, the quiet power of humility, and the simple, profound truth that a person's value is not determined by a title, a paycheck, or the approval of others. My life now is one I couldn't have even dreamed of back in that 5th-floor cubicle. As the Chief Innovation Officer at Summit, my name is on multiple new patents. But the work I'm most proud of has nothing to do with code. At my urging, and with Harrison's full backing, Summit established an internal venture capital fund called the Catalyst Initiative. We don't invest in big, established players. We seek out and fund the brilliant solo inventors, the small startups, the iconoclast, the kinds of minds that are most at risk of being crushed, exploited, or ignored by the corporate world. We offer them more than just money. We offer them ironclad legal protection for their IP, active mentorship, and a platform to build on their own terms. The other day, I was sitting in on a pitch meeting. A young female engineer, probably not much older than I was when I first started at RLS, was nervously but brilliantly presenting her work. She was a powerhouse, and her idea was revolutionary. After she finished, my team of VPs in their expensive suits immediately began peppering her with questions about market share, scalability, and profit margins. I held up a hand, silencing them. I looked at the young woman, and I saw the familiar, potent mix of hope and fear in her eyes. I smiled. "Your technology is incredible," I said. "We're all blown away, but I have a different question. Let's talk about you. What's your plan to protect your intellectual property? Tell us how we can structure a deal that invests in you as a founder, not just in the idea you've created." A visible wave of relief washed over her face. In that moment, watching her stand a little taller, I realized my journey had finally come full circle. The long, painful fight hadn't just been about getting what I was owed. It had been about learning a lesson that was bigger than any one company or any family feud. It was about learning that true value, the kind that lasts, isn't just about what you can create for yourself. It's about creating a world where other people are seen, valued, and empowered to create, too. It's about making sure everyone knows they are irreplaceable. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight to prove your own worth at work or even in your own family? Share your story in the comments below.